Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Mel and I'm a knitter and crafter living on the Orkney Islands off the north coast of Scotland. If you are a new viewer, then hi, and if you are a returning viewer, then definitely welcome back. So today I have not many items to show actually. I've been working, I wouldn't say monogamously, but fairly so. I have one work in progress that you have seen, if you're a returning viewer, that you would have seen before, and I have two new cast-ons, which is why I haven't progressed that much with my current work in progress, or my older work in progress. All three are garments, because I'm on a garments kick at the moment apparently, and yeah. So first of all, we'll just mention what I'm wearing, which is my arboreal sweater, designed by Jennifer Steingass, and this I knit in the drop soft tweed in the carrot cake colourway, which is this lovely tweedy yarn, and it's got a plant fibre in it. I'm trying to remember what the base is. It's definitely got alpaca in it, and it's got viscose in it. I'm not sure what else, but it does mean that it tends to stretch out quite easily. At the cuffs and what have you stretch out quite easily compared to wool. But other than that, it is quite cosy and surprisingly warm for the amount of viscose that's in it, because it is a relatively high quantity, because the alpaca is obviously very, very warm. So onto the first work in progress, and the one that I have shown before. This is my I'd like to say striped sweater, but it isn't, but a stripy raglan flax light sweater, in some absolutely gorgeous yarns, which I'll talk about in a moment. I have done most of the body, which is where I'd already done last time I showed on the podcast. I knit to the minimum length that I would want it, and I haven't decided the finished length that I would like. And I have almost completed one sleeve. It has been ripped back once, sort of to this point, because I realised I needed to change. No, it got ripped back further. It was ripped back to to these decreases on the sleeve, and I decided I want to knit some straight before starting the decreases again, because it was just getting a little bit snug on this part of the yarn. I found with knitting sleeves I always end up knitting them at least twice, because I like them to decrease initially at the bicep, and then I like to knit straight for a section, because there isn't an awful lot of difference between the width here on my bicep and past my elbow. I have quite chunky joints, so there isn't a lot of difference between here to here, so I like to knit that kind of straight to get past the elbow, and then decrease again towards the wrist. So that's what I did. I ended up ripping back to my minimum decrease width, and then I knit a small section, probably about 4 inches here, which hasn't got any decreases, and then I've become decreasing again. I'm up to the wrist. I need to try this on again. I'm not 100% sure whether I want to pull back a little bit and then make it a little bit more balloon-like at the wrist, but I need to try on again and just kind of walk around the house and do a couple of bits with the ball of yarn in my pocket, and see how it feels when I'm actually doing something, instead of just like kind of standing in front of the mirror and kind of guessing, put your arm down, put your arm up, bend your elbow, that sort of thing, to see if it fits right. It doesn't really give you a true indication of how it's going to fit when you're actually wearing the garment. So I have used the Flax Light pattern for this, which is a free pattern on Ravelry by Tin Can Knits, and their patterns are very, very good. My picture is not very, very good, but it is what I have with my very temperamental printer. It is a basic top-down raglan sweater. It doesn't have short rows in the back of the neck, but I have added short rows to this. It does have short rows underneath the yoke, I think. You can add short rows, but I don't think they're above the neck, which is where I like to add extra short rows. I've done, the gauge is to gauge. I've done a 24 stitch gauge. I'm not sure on my rounds because half the time I don't count them. I just kind of wing it, unless it's very, very important. You would think it would be important with a raglan, but it kind of depends. Most of the time, as long as you're close to gauge, it doesn't really matter. And I've used a 3mm needle for the stockinette. And I'm not sure what I did for the rib actually, which I should have wrote down because I'm going to need to know that when I come to the cups. It says 2.75mm on the pattern, so maybe I just did that, which is what I've done for other garments in the past, gone down to a 2.75. It is a really nice pattern. It's supposed to have, it's not going to show on the camera, but it is supposed to have garter panels down the sleeves, but I haven't added those. I've just left them plain. And I have used a fingering weight yarn in a beautiful blend that I bought from the Scottish Yarn Festival last September. I think I've changed the increases. I don't know if they have knit front back for the increases. Let's just check. Because some raglans use a knit front back for increases and they can look messy. But I have used knit one left, knit one right on either side of the raglan stitches. It is a free pattern, so I can check and mention it. Yes, they've used knit front back for either side of the 2 stitches in the middle of the raglan, and I don't like the look of that, like I said, so I've done, I'm going to try not getting my face in shot so you can see these raglan stitches. So I've done knit left, knit right, either side of the 2 middle raglan stitches, and it just looks tidier in my opinion. You can see on the back the top stripe is deeper than the others on the back because of the short row shaping I've put in at the back of the neck, but at the front it's the same width right at the front. You can see I've brought the short rows round almost to the front of the garment, and it's working up really, really nicely. I can't wait to wear it. It actually looks really nice on top of the dress that I'm currently wearing, which I made a few years ago now. It is the penny dress by Seamwork, I think it is. Or it's either Colette or Seamwork, but because they're kind of together, I'm not sure which one it is. Really happy with this one. This is like a light brushed cotton as well, so it's really cozy. The yarns I've used 4 colours. I'll try not to pull out my knitting in holding up the grey, which is what I'm currently knitting with. But I have these 4 colours. The colour's looking a little strange in here because the light, it was sunny a moment ago and we've got some cloud coming, so the light has gone a little bit strange. But we have a kind of a light, it's not really a beige, it's, what would I call that? I'm not sure. It's kind of a beige, but it's not. It's almost bordering on a mushroom. That one, and then we have a bluish grey, which is looking very blue on my screen, but is probably shown up all right on camera. But it is a grey rather than a blue. It just has blue undertones. We have a lovely rich gold, and then we have this one, which is kind of like almost like a buff pink. It's almost like plaster pink, like wall plaster pink. And they are all the same base from the same dyer, and I hope I have a label in here. I do. They are from Nervous Fibre. There's her logo, and the base is 70% alpaca, 20% cashmere, 10% silk. So this yarn is beautiful. It is so soft. It's like a cloud and it's super soft, like kitten fur. It is really lovely. I just fell in love with it when I first saw this. She had a sample knit, a striped sample of Andrea Mowry's stripes, and I did mention on the previous episode that originally I'd intended to make the same item, but then chose I didn't want a round yoked striped sweater. I'd rather have it as a raglan. Raglan's just, I just like the fit better. I do have a lot of round yoke sweaters, and especially for colour work they're perfect, but I think a raglan just fits nicer. I don't know if it's because I of a curvaceous nature, and having a larger bust, it just looks better with a raglan rather than a round yoke, which can make me look a little bit top heavy. But with the colour work, depending on how I've done the colour work, it can look fine. Although I've found doing colour work yokes that it seems to work better for me and have a nicer fit if I cast on a smaller size yoke than I want to have in the bust size. I found a lot of problem with pattern grading is that when you grade up patterns, everything gets graded up, but just because you maybe have a larger bust size doesn't necessarily mean you have broader shoulders or larger upper arms or larger waist and so on. So I found that if I do a round yoke based upon my bust size, they tend to be really bulky on the shoulders. I have a couple of round yoke sweaters that look really bulky, like bulky on the shoulders, and it's just because I've gone off my bust size when I've chosen which size to knit. So knitting a size or two yoke down and starting out at that size fits my shoulders better, and then increasing the stitches once we get to separating for the sleeves to give you that extra room for the bust seems to work quite well. I know some people do short rows for large, is it large bust, I can't remember what it's called, where you can adjust the bust size on garments for small bust size and large bust size so that the rest of the proportions work out. There's a term for it in sewing as well, but the name eludes me right now. But I suppose that would be a similar sort of thing. Anyway, I'm digressing now. So that is my current state of where my Flax light striped sweater is, because I've cast on 2 new garments since the last episode, and a lot of my focus, well, almost all my focus has been on these 2 new items because new and shiny. So I will start with, which one shall I start with? I will start with the one that's already out of its bag, and this one is a big bulky cardigan. It is the, well, I'm using the Bly cardigan as a base for this cardigan, but I have made modifications. So I'll show you first how far I've gotten. I'm just trying not to get tangled up in my needles and my yarn, and I did have to push some stitches back onto one of the needles. I was halfway through a row and realised just before I was about to record, so I had to shunt the stitches across back to the beginning of the round. Right, I think we're all kind of lined up now. So this is how far I've gotten so far on this big oversized cozy cardigan, and I love it. I have split for sleeves as well, because once you get past that point it feels like plain sailing really. So I have split for sleeves. I put my hand in that sleeve hole, there we go. That kind of helps, I suppose. It is a V-neck cardigan. It is knit back and forth, I know, I'm purling and I hate purling, but it's chunkier yarn so it doesn't matter too much. And it is a raglan design. Again, I do like a raglan. Where's the raglan? There's the raglan. And I've tried to make the pattern work as neat as possible at the raglans. So the pattern, the pattern is based upon the Bly cardigan by Amy Christophers. Again, I think this one's a free pattern on Ravelry too, or on Barocco's website, but you can get the link from on Ravelry. The picture is not very good, but it is a basic raglan, kind of long length, basic raglan cardigan. Now I've knit this before with the same yarn, and the original pattern is knit with, I think it's DK weight. Is it DK weight or worsted weight? Barocco Indigo. Their recommended gauge is a 20 stitch gauge, which suggests a DK weight. DK weight, worsted weight, sort of stat size. Now I've done the same as I did when I knit my first Bly cardigan, and I'm using a heavy Aran weight and knitting the smallest size. Last time I knit this on a 7mm needle, and this time I'm knitting on a 6mm, I think it is. Yeah, because I don't have a 6.5, so I'm knitting on a 6mm needle to get a much bigger cardigan and oversized. My first one is very oversized. This one I've gone down a needle size. I'm saying size far too many times, but there we go. So that it's not quite so oversized. Also because the stitch I'm using, which I'm adding to the pattern, it's got a lot of garter in it, so it kind of stretches more. So if I'd done this on the 7mm, it'd be quite sloppy, whereas as it stands, it looks nice and the stitch definition is really nice, but at the same time it's got lots of stretch because of the garter, that it's still going to be nice and oversized, if that makes sense. So I'm using Drops Alaska for this, which is the same yarn I used last time, but I'm using a different colour. Last time I used the charcoal. This time I'm using colour number 55, which I think is beige. It's probably beige or light beige. I think it's just called beige. And I've got quite a lot of this, so I should have plenty. So the changes I made, well, I added a pattern, but I'm also knitting the button band as I go, which is what I did for the first Bly. So instead of knitting a like 1x1 or 2x1 rib, what I'm doing is when I get to the end of the row, I'm knitting, I think it's 5 stitches. Knitting 5 stitches. Well, I'm knitting 4 stitches and then slipping the last stitch, and then on the other side I'm knitting all 5 stitches, and then when you get to the end of the row, again slip the last stitch, and it just makes a garter band because I won't be doing buttonholes for this. When I come to do the collar and the bottom band, I think last time I did 1x1 twisted rib, which gave a kind of a similar look to it as the garter button bands. The pattern, I fell in love with a cardigan called the Campside Waffle cardigan by Alexandra Travel years ago, and I did consider making that cardigan, but when I looked at it, it was pieced, drop shoulder, and for some reason I didn't like the pattern, so I thought I'll combine the pattern with a pattern I do like, which is the Bly. So that's what I've done. So it's just a simple waffle stitch design. It's nothing fancy, and I'm really loving the look of this. I was going to hold fire and get a different shade of brown for this cardigan, but I'm trying to use from stash, and I really wanted another oversized cardigan that I could throw over like a second sweater if I needed to, or just kind of wrap, like cozy down in when it's chilly, but you just want to kind of wrap up almost like a blanket. So I wanted a second cardigan in a browner shade rather than the black. So that's what I've done. I've used from stash, and I had this in stash, so I've used it, and I'm really liking the stitch definition, how it's looking, so I'm really happy with it. I don't think there's much else to say on it at the moment. I think I've set the yarn, 6mm needles, and I just keep plugging away at it. It tends to make my fingers hurt because it's a chunkier yarn and chunkier needles, partly, but also because I'm a needle pusher. So when I'm pushing the stitches up my left needle, I tend to push the stitches but push the needle, if that makes sense. So I tend to go like that to push the needles towards the tip. So I'm forever pressing on my finger with the needle tips, which, I mean, I don't use sharp needle tips, I use wooden needles for the vast majority of my knitting. But that one, because the stitches don't slip quite so easily with it being a chunkier yarn, and obviously must be pressing more. Either that or I was just knitting for too long, because I ended up with a big hole. Well, not a big hole, but I got a hole in my finger and had to wear a piece of surgical tape on my finger for the next couple of nights of knitting till I could knit properly again. I have done that before. Sometimes it's just if my skin gets quite dry from like being in the garden and doing bits and pieces and just doing housekeeping-y things. So especially for the garden, the soil tends to dry your skin out. So it tends to like crack a little bit on your fingers, and that makes weak points, and I think that doesn't help as well. But that is my Waffle Bly cardigan. Okay, last item for this episode. Yet another garment cast on, because I can't resist garments. I love knitting garments. I don't know why. I love knitting various things at different times. Sometimes I'm really on a sock kick. I didn't mean to make a pun there. Last winter, just before Christmas, I think I knit 3 or 4 pairs of socks in sort of like October to December, which is unusual for me. I usually have a pair of socks on the go, but it's usually one of those things I pick up when I've got nothing else to do. But I really was on a sock knitting binge last winter, and then I get the occasional urge to knit a shawl, even though I don't wear them very often. I wear them very infrequently actually, but I do like occasionally to knit a shawl. But garments is where it lies with me. I just love it. So I am knitting a kind of casual autumn sweater. It's another raglan. I've just realised these are all raglans this episode. I've got 3. I hadn't realised everything was a raglan. Apparently I'm really loving raglans right now. Yeah, so this is in a variegated yarn. It's all curling up, so I apologise. So the yarn's not showing up very, very well. And I haven't done a huge amount. Obviously I haven't separated the sleeves yet, but I can't imagine I'm a little bit off, but no, not massively so. And this one, I'm not sure why I didn't use the Flax light as a base for the numbers for this, but I didn't. I used another pattern. And the light's gone really blue now. It's really strange, the light in here today, because the cloud has come in. It's obviously picking up the purples in this room on camera, and it's making me look even more anemic than I normally do. Well, you know, I've got rosy cheeks, but I am really rather pale and blue untoned skin, so sometimes I can look like I've got hypothermia. The yarn that I've used, I'll get that out of the way first, is some of my own hand dyed yarns from when I was a yarn dyer, and I kept these in stash because I really, really like them. This is a BFL nylon base, I think. Yeah, it's BFL nylon, and it is in the colourway Autumn Leaves, and it is botanically dyed, and it is kind of a pale mustardy yellow and some orange, burnt orange in there as well, and some hints of gold too. I have 4 skeins of this, so I've got plenty, and I want it to be not oversized, but I want it to be kind of a throw on over a t-shirt and sweatpants sort of sweater. So I'm not sure how big I'm going to make this. I'm using, oh, I know why I used a different pattern now. I am using the Salem sweater as a base for this. This is by Dragon Hoard Designs. I have knit a Salem before. It is a lovely design with cabling down the sleeves, and it is lovely. It's one of my favourite sweaters to wear out and about. I used sparkle yarn as well, so yeah, bling. This time I'm not doing the cabling because the pattern calls for fingering weight held double with mohair silk, which obviously makes a thicker yarn, and I'm just using fingering weight yarn. And when I knit a sample in the just in fingering weight, it didn't look right, so I am knitting it just fingering weight and knitting it plain down the sleeves. The gauge, I believe, is supposed to be 22 stitch gauge, but I am not knitting 22 stitch gauge because it is fingering weight, and that can look a little bit sloppy. I'm trying to find the beginning and where my gauge is written down. So I am doing a 24 stitch gauge, I assume, because that's my standard. And this, oh no, the gauge for this is 23 stitches, but I am knitting it 24 stitch gauge or thereabouts. I'm using I have took it off the needles, but I'm using a 3mm needle, I think. Let me just check my Ravelry. I'm using a 3mm needle. But what I've done to add a little bit of interest is I've added some garter bands on either side, if I can get this to show up, on either side of the raglans. So on either side of the raglan stitches, I've just done these garter bands on either side, all the way down, just for a little bit of stitch interest. It's not a lot, it just makes the raglans a little bit more interesting. Funnily enough, I did see somebody's podcast the other day and they were knitting a sweater, and the name of the podcast and the sweater eludes me, so I'll have to check that again. I think it was yesterday I was watching, and that pattern had raglans with a band of moss stitch in the middle of the raglan. I really like the look of that, so I'm going to have to chase up what that pattern was and make a note of it on Ravelry in my favourites, because I quite like, sometimes you just need a basic sweater, but a basic sweater with something in it. The idea for the garter bands came about when I was watching TV a few weeks ago. We were watching a TV series, and it was a detective series, and the detective was liaisoning with a detective in Germany, and she had a sweater on and it had these garter bands on the sides of the raglan. It's funny enough, I didn't used to notice knitting on TV before. It's been a relatively recent thing. If you've ever watched the series Marcella, is it Marcella? She has some fabulous sweaters. I just kept noticing, oh, that's a nice sweater. So I'm gonna have to look back on that and make a note of some of her sweaters too. So yes, garter bands on the raglan. Also, I have changed the neckline, and I'm not sure if I'm going to change it again, but I decided, instead of doing a ribbed collar, I decided to do a garter collar, but it is kind of rolling out at the back. I was hoping it would roll in more, but that might block out, or actually when you wear it, it might be okay, because I wanted more of a casual collar rather than a ribbed collar. So we shall see. I might change that again. I hate ripping out collars and top down sweaters because it is a pain in the bum, but I will do it if I have to. So that is my completely adapted Salem sweater. I do a lot of adapting these days to patterns. I think once you've knit a pattern, you think, oh, I like the fit of it, but I could use it as a base for something else, which I really enjoy doing. So that is my 3 items for this episode. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, because I don't have any acquisitions because we're on a yarn diet this year and probably next year, or mostly. I did look, I was window shopping yesterday on Tinternet, and I saw a yarn pack that goes along with a pattern. You know, you buy these yarn packs for like crocheted or knitted blankets, like Lucy from Attic 24 does them on Wool Warehouse and things like that. And there was one, it was on Wool Warehouse, and it was for a crocheted blanket. And I don't crochet very often because since I learnt to knit well, I haven't really crocheted very much. It's kind of not fell out of favour, but I enjoy knitting more. But I did see this crocheted blanket, and I think the colour pack was called Brown Sugar, and it's shades of browns and golds and a little bit of orange in there and a lot of cream, so it's not like just 70s orange and brown, if you know what I mean. It's got those hints of those kind of 70s golds and browns and orange and stuff, but then it's got a lot of background. I think it was either cream or white or very light cream, and I thought, I'm very tempted. You know, birthday in January. January is not this year, so could I like tempted, very, very tempted. But for some reason I've just got this urge in my head to knit a blanket. I don't even like use blankets that often, but I don't know. And it does have like granny squares, but it's not all granny squares. There's like big panels and big squares and little squares that go round. So I'm thinking, well, could I commit to something like that? Because a granny square blanket I have tried a couple of times, and it just, I lose enthusiasm for it very, very quickly. It's like, make a square, okay, make another square, make another, and I get bored. But I think making something like that, you can kind of do like a big centre panel and then do your borders round. And by the time you've done them and you're bored of it, you're moving on to something different. So maybe I'll think about it. So there's no acquisitions, and there hasn't been all year, I don't think. I've been very, very restrained. So we have Vlogtober coming up. I'm not sure if I will get a video out before Vlogtober, because Vlogtober is the 1st, I think, is on Sunday. So normally I would put out a video at the back end of a week. So I'm not sure if I will get another video in before Vlogtober. Maybe, we'll see. It won't be, if I do, it won't be a podcast episode because I won't have done a lot of knitting within a week to justify having a podcast. So I might have another video on some other topic, but I'm not sure yet. Otherwise, it'll be Vlogtober. And I'm not sure if I will put out a podcast during Vlogtober or wait until like the 1st of November. I might put one out at the back end of the month, but, and then I can show any Halloween knitting. I don't know, I'm not sure yet, but we'll see. But Vlogtober, as it stands, is happening. I'm going to attempt to vlog almost every day. If not every day, then almost every day, rather than the weekly vlogs that I think I did last year. And yeah, so I think I'm going to leave this episode here because not an awful lot has happened since I last recorded, to be truth be told. We have just carried on picking things from the garden and basically haven't been anywhere. So I'm just, there's not a lot to report. So I'm going to leave it here, and I shall hopefully see you on the next video. Bye bye.